Hey, everybody, welcome to the PC Perspective Podcast. This is episode 277 being recorded on November the 13th, 2013. I'm Ryan Shrout.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom.
I'm Josh Walrus.
And I'm Alan Malventano.
And I'm obviously not at the office. I am instead in, we'll call it beautiful downtown San Jose. That's what we'll call it. Finishing
San
up
Jose or Santa Clara?
No, it's in downtown San Jose. It's at the San Jose Convention Center.
Oh, that's a rather big thing.
Yeah, it's a little bit unfortunate because the convention hall that they're in is enormous, and they didn't have enough people to fill it, and so it makes it look less attended than it actually was. There's pretty good turnout, but it's if you have a giant house and no furniture in it, it kind of gives the same impression that this would too. So I'm out here at the AMD. I don't even know what it's officially called. They keep calling it the APU 13 event. It's their developers conference, so we'll have some news to talk about from that. But it was apparently a fairly busy week, and I have to catch a flight in not too long, so we're going to jump right into things. First, if you want to join our spam list to get notified when we go live, you should do that. It is at pcper.com/subscribe, and it's pretty easy. Just give us your name and your email address. I think you probably don't even have to really give your name if you don't want to. I don't know. If you hit submit and it errors out, then you need to put your name in. But you get a notification when we go live. I used it a few times this week when we were doing our live blogs, and I sent one out just a little bit ago right before we started recording our podcast. And I'll probably send one out tomorrow when we start to tear apart a PlayStation 4, if everything goes as planned. So join that list and see our smiling faces when we do things. Also, I know we had some questions about the Halloween contest. When I get back in town, probably tomorrow some point or Friday, I will pick the winners and announce the winners, and we'll showcase that on the site. But I just haven't had a chance to look through all of them yet. So we have not forgotten you. We will embarrass you thoroughly for your submissions and give somebody a whole bunch of free hardware. So keep an eye out for that. Let's start talking about reviews. We're going to talk with Alan.
No, Alan actually had content.
Alan wrote a review of the OCZ Vector 150, which is a new SSD that is not 150 gigs. It's 240 and 120. What's new, Alan?
Wait a minute.
He's barefoot in the test bed right now.
Yeah, OCZ Vector.
I thought we talked about that last week for some reason, but apparently we didn't.
No.
Oh, yeah, because it went live right after the podcast.
Alan, you're smoking crack, dude. You don't remember not talking last week, which you, in fact, did not talk?
Yeah.
We didn't talk about it. Let's talk about it now. Tell me about the damn drive.
Yes, Vector 150. So it's basically very, very similar to the OCZ Vector, if you're familiar with the original Vector launch, which is the Barefoot 3 Indie Links controller. However, this drive is a little bit different, mainly that it's driving Toshiba Flash, 19 nanometer style. But other than that, the performance is almost identical. A little bit faster, but nothing to write home about. Yeah, it's Ken is showing on the stream the from the presentation they sent us, the Enthusiast. It's their Enthusiast SSD, so it's this little dude with his arms up in the air.
Hooray, I pooped all by myself!
Bobby! Yeah.
I thought we all just sat at our desks with our arms in the air every time we were playing games and stuff. Like, that's just how you react.
Yeah, he's playing rave music at his PC on his SSD, and he's happy about it.
And he's sitting on his commode.
Yes.
Yes. So the Vector 150 is supposed to basically replace the Vector, which makes sense. Performance, basically, it's the same drive. However, due to the 19 nanometer Toshiba flash, the hope is that not just the MSRP, but the end result, actual cost you can pick one of these things up for will be lower, significantly lower than the original Vector, which should be the case because this flash memory is a little bit lower in cost. Usually you see bigger differences when a manufacturer changes amongst the different types of flash memory. But in this case, it seems like the Barefoot 3 is it's basically given it all it's got, just all on its own. So I think the controller is more the bottleneck here. Not so much a bottleneck, really, because it is a pretty quick drive, but that seems to be the limiting factor, given that the change in flash didn't really change the performance much. So the MSRPs The sweet spot is 240 gig, and it's supposed to launch MSRP at $240. So an even dollar a gig. Not bad. I mean, I'd like to see it lower, but I think this might be among the lowest we've seen for MSRP launch prices, right? But at the end of the day, the proof is going to be what it actually starts shipping for. Given on Newegg, Amazon, etc.
Yeah.
How much you can actually get them for. I really do hope this drive sees more volume than the original Vector, mainly because that volume is what causes the price to drop, right?
Yeah.
We hope.
It looks like they're for sale on Newegg, so the 240 gig model is $240. So,
yep. It's good to see it's at least at MSRP, right? Because sometimes, if there's a higher demand, then the price will even go higher than MSRP, which is really bad news for SSDs. But yeah, I mean, it's good. The other notable thing about this drive specifically is that it's a 5-year warranty, A. That's one part. And B, OCZ is rating it for 50 gig per day writes for 5 years.
Which is a lot, correct?
That's like almost enterprise level write.
Shouldn't 19 nanometer not be able to handle that kind of usage?
It all depends on how the wear leveling works out and how the drive has been refined, right? How the firmware operates on the drive. The Vector has always been, Barefoot 3 has always been a pretty good controller. So I think between firmware tweaks that have happened since the original Vector launch and refinements that Toshiba has made on that flash, because realize 19 nanometer Toshiba's, it's been out for a little while. So they've probably refined it enough to get, I'm just taking a guess here, but probably the PE cycles are greater than 3,000 for this particular flash. So if they can get it up high enough, and the controller can be efficient enough, then yeah, it can probably handle 50 gig. I'd have to dig a little bit deeper, but they might rate that specifically, like in super fine print somewhere, like 50 gig of flash writes versus 50 gig of host writes. In other words, if you send the drive 50 gig of large files, it'll equate to roughly 50 gig worth of flash writes. But if you send it 50 gig worth of 4K random access writes, then it'll be much more writes to the actual flash memory. So
sure.
I would venture a guess that, if you were going to rate it that high, you'd probably rate it more on flash writes just to sort of protect yourself as a company from someone just deciding to do random 4K writes for like 5 years.
I have a great idea for them to improve and increase their volume. Go from Barefoot and rename it Bigfoot and make it a 5 1/4 inch drive. It'll take up a lot more volume.
OCZ has previously made 5 1/4 inch form factor drives.
No. They made 3.5 inch. They made standard hard drive size. They didn't make a 5 1/4 inch.
Yeah. Sorry. I was
DVD ROM sized.
You do not remember the Mac Store Bigfoot?
Well, wait, no.
Yep.
They did have one, but it was hardly like an SSD because it had RAM on it. Remember that one? We saw it at CES.
Yeah.
It was on a big old PCB.
Oh, that thing.
It was like full of 60. I think it was 64 gig worth of RAM.
Oh my gosh, Knight Rider corrected me. It was Quantum. Quantum had the Bigfoot.
Yeah.
The 5 1/4 inch drive that were cheap and slow.
It was
but cheap.
It was cost effective. I had those. I seem to remember them dying a lot though. All right, so that's the Vector 150.
You could replace the gyroscopes in aircraft with the Bigfoot.
So that's the Vector 150. Go read up on his article, Alan's article review, if you want to check out more on that. We need to move on because we got a lot of stuff to cover. Like apparently, NVIDIA launched a new graphics card last week. The NVIDIA GeForce GTX 780 Ti launched on November the 7th, which would be the day after we recorded our podcast. People like to do that to us. So for people that maybe are behind a week or this is their only capability of keeping up on tech news, this is a full GK110 GPU, which is interesting because you guys can correct me. I don't think it's existed ever, even in like the Tesla or Quadro at this point, right? Maybe it did in Tesla, where the GK110 GPU, even when it shipped as the Titan, had one SMX unit disabled. This one has no SMX units disabled, so you're actually getting the full allotment of cores, which is 2,880, an increase over the 2,600. I don't remember what it was now. On the here I have a handy chart on the article. 2880 on this new GTX 780 Ti. The Titan had 2688, and the GTX 780 has 2,304. So you kind of see now the scale. Like there's a pretty big jump down from Titan to GTX 780, and then there's a small jump up from Titan to GTX 780 Ti. It's the same GPU. It's running at a little bit higher clock speeds. The base clock is 875 now instead of 836. So you're getting more cores, and they're running faster, and the memory is faster. You're going from a 6 gigahertz to a 7 gigahertz clock on your GDDR5, which is cool. You get increased theoretical compute performance, you have more ROPs, you have more texture units, but it is a 3 gig frame buffer, so it's the same size frame buffer as the 780, not as the GTX Titan. Now, you look at the pictures of it, the card looks very similar to the other cards we've seen, the 780 and the Titan. It's got the same cooler design. It just says GTX 780 Ti now instead of GTX 780 or Titan.
Did your samples blow up?
No, my samples did not blow up. We can talk about that a little bit at the end.
Did you fry bacon on it?
No. And see, what's interesting to me is, so there are rumors going around today that some 780s are getting, 780 Ti's rather, are getting recalled because of some, they're burning the traces behind the power delivery, I think, which would be interesting to me because this card still doesn't pull as much power as the 290X, so it would come down to PCB design and whether or not they didn't really, plan correctly for the power that this would be changing, right? Because it's pretty. They kind of took the same card and just enabled another set of another SMX unit and then turned up the clocks, right? So if they did that without a whole bunch of safety checks, there could be issues. But in terms of pricing, the GTX 780 Ti is now it's going to be $699. It is now $699. It's for sale already, which puts it $150 more than the Radeon R9 290X and $200 more expensive than the GTX 780 proper. And that's a lot of difference, right? That's a pretty steep price curve, but it's under the price of the Titan. The Titan is not dropping in price. NVIDIA is pretty confident in their capability to sell Titans for people who are interested in double precision floating point, which the GTX 780 Ti does not have full speed. So it's running at the same kind of performance levels that the GTX 780 did in terms of, I think it's 1/24th instead of 1/6. I think that's right. DP to SP floating point performance. So we ran it through our normal benchmarks. It is now the new fastest graphics card we've tested. If you look at, Battlefield or Crysis 3 in particular, you're seeing, we tested 1080, 2560 by 1440 and 4K. And the GTX 780 Ti is the fastest card, sometimes by a sizable margin, right, over the R9 290X or the GTX 780. So some places it's not a huge amount. Some places it is. It all kind of depends. It is the fastest video card we've tested, but it's not like a complete slam dunk in terms of, it dominates everything to justify that $150 price addition against the R9 290X, right? So I think really what this card is NVIDIA didn't want to not have the flagship card anymore. They knew they couldn't charge more than they were charging for the Titan because AMD had kind of been pretty aggressive on the pricing of the 290X and the 290. And they just kind of said, this is what we're going to do. It's interesting. If you look at the power consumption numbers and the noise levels on this card, they're higher than any other NVIDIA cards by kind of a noticeable amount, right? So kind of what it looks like is AMD presented this new status quo for the high-end card where they were willing to pull more power and they were willing to be louder in order to make sure they beat NVIDIA out of the gate with the launch of the Hawaii GPU. And NVIDIA was kind of like, if they're willing to do it, if we do it just a little bit less than that, we can still claim benefits, and we're also going to be the more efficient architecture because we're quieter and drawing less power, but we're also faster. So they did do that. But I mean, you're talking 50 watts increase in consumption for the 780 Ti over the 780, and the noise levels are much higher than the GTX 780 as well. Just the fan speed's got to spin at a higher level. But
I think this is interesting that the NVIDIA part is 100 millimeters square bigger than the AMD one, but it still pulls less power and it runs cooler with fairly similar cooling apparatus attached to it. So we can certainly say that they're both using TSMC 28 nanometer HK metal gate. The design still has a very big factor on these products, and it's not just process tech.
Right. It's like I've had some interesting discussions this week with like Raja about what the status is and why they're confident in what they're doing and the clock variances that we'll talk about in a second. And it's it's just there's physics involved, right? I'm sure AMD would have loved to have been able to run their chip at 85C instead of 95C and get the same performance, but it wasn't going to happen. So AMD, NVIDIA kind of said, well, they gave us a little bit of flexibility now because even if we make our architecture hotter and louder and draw more power, it's still not going to be as hot or as loud or draw as much power as what they did. And so now we can get some more performance out of it because now that's kind of like the new acceptable. Because reviewers in the media kind of, we really loved the 290 and we kind of loved the 290X. And we kind of, I'd say for the most part, we're a little bit forgiving on the noise levels. And so NVIDIA's kind of took that and said, okay, fine. If that's not as important right now, then we'll go with that. So the 780 Ti is it's a really cool card. It's a really nice. Let me use that word again. It's a really good card. It's a high performance card. It has all the great NVIDIA features. It's if you want to run these in SLI, you've got the frame pacing capability that is superior to what AMD is doing still with the R9 cards, even the Hawaii cards. It has some disadvantages. It's got 3 gigs instead of 4 gigs of frame buffer. The AMD cards tend to get closer to the performance level of the 780 Ti when we get into 4K results. So that would, even if you're not running 4K, if you're running 3-monitor Eyefinity, that's something to consider because you're running at similar pixel count levels. And the 780 Ti is $150 more expensive than the 290X. So it's the fastest card. I think at this point it's safe to say no gamer should buy the Titan. And if you bought a Titan, I'm sorry. But the Titan is way overpriced now. Its performance is bypassed by the GTX 780 Ti. So unless you're doing double precision floating point like work, you don't want a Titan. You want these cards. Like if you were the guy that was kind of thinking about buying a Titan, now you know what you're going to buy. You're going to buy this. It's the fastest. It's the best. And it's kind of expensive. So that's what happens at the high end. But hey, competition, again, great. Now you get a better performing card from NVIDIA than Titan, and it's $300 less than Titan was just a little bit ago.
So when are you sending your Titans to Scott so he can start doing GPU stuff and double precision?
As soon as he needs them. As soon as he shows me some bottlenecks that he's working on. I don't know. I like Titans. Too. Say what?
You can use them to exercise too. Those are not light cards.
They're not that bad. Real quick, I'll mention I did a short preview of the EVGA GeForce GTX 780 Ti ACX. It's the same PCB as a standard model, but they are using a dual fan cooler. Their ACX cooler they've used on several other graphics cards. It's overclocked. It's actually the boost clock is at the base clock. I'm sorry, is at 1,006 megahertz, which is a significant increase over the 875 megahertz of the reference model. So you're getting like 15% overclock out of the box with this card. And if you scroll on to that second graph where we show the clock speed comparison, you can see that the blue line represents the reference, the green line represents the EVGA card, and it's running at, this is after a like 10-minute warm-up period on the GPU, which is a new thing everybody has to do now. And the sustained clocks are, staying above 1100 megahertz while playing Crysis 3. Which is pretty awesome, right? So it looks like a really good card, and if you look at the performance metrics, like at 2560 by 1440, which is the only test I had time to run before I had to leave, you're talking about an 8% to 17% performance advantage, depending on where on that percentile curve you actually look. And it's quieter. I was actually expecting it to be more quiet. I was expecting it to be quieter than the reference card than it turned out to be. It's still, a noticeable amount quieter than the reference cooler, but not by a huge amount. So I think that's actually for sale now too. So fairly well overclocked card out of the gate. I guess we need to talk about this AMD 290X 290 stuff again. I feel like this was 3 weeks ago, guys. Is this? So
It's
when Tom's
deja
Hardware
vu
wrote-
all over again.
I know. When Tom's Hardware wrote their R9 290 review, they kind of posited that, hey, they had looked at some retail cards and that there were some potential issues with the performance of retail cards versus the performance of press samples, and then the reliability to stay at high clocks on those retail cards versus the same thing on the press cards. And so we got some retail cards in. We got a retail 290 and a retail 290X, and we started doing some of our own testing. And there was a fairly significant difference, but AMD was kind of on top of it, and they reacted fairly quickly, and they released a new driver that they said was going to fix performance variances. And what the performance variance actually did was increase fan speed. So this is where it gets really complicated. So say you had an R9 290. I had two of them. I actually had three of them, right? And they were all reporting that they were running at 47% fan speed. But if you looked at the RPM of those fans, they were not running at the same speed. The press sample was running at, I don't know, let's say 2,500 RPM, while the retail one was running at 2,300 RPM. Or it was 200 or 300 RPM difference, which is a lot when you kind of consider that the RPM is deciding how much thermal headroom it's giving the GPU to actually work with, and that thermal headroom decides what the clock speeds are going to be, and those clock speeds decide how fast your game is going to run. So, a 10% difference in fan speeds means a lot. And, our benchmarks in this I did a couple of page article on the variances of the retail versus the reference and first run versus second run. And there's a bunch of stuff in here where if you look at those fan speeds with the 13.11 V8 driver, which was the original one we got, versus the 13.11 V9.2 driver that we got, that we had to basically run the MSI retail R9 290 at 50% fan speed, according to the software, to match the actual RPM levels of the reference one. So I don't want to get into the discussion of PWM percentages versus what RPMs it was actually creating. And so basically what they did with this driver, the 9.2 driver, is they decided to normalize not on PWM percentages, because obviously that was creating variance, instead normalize on an RPM value. So now they've moved the targets really on these cards so that the target RPM for the R9 290X is now 2,200 RPM, and it's 2,650 RPM on the R9 290. Now that sounds fine, right? Okay, normalize it to that. That should give all the silicon that's out there the best chance of performing as they expected it to. My problem was that both of those RPMs are higher than even the press samples we had. And in my talks with other editors in the hardware business, and obviously NVIDIA was involved at some point because they were the one, I think they bought like 25 290Xs, right? They're probably the biggest one supporting AMD's profit margins for that week. But the issue is nobody in Tom's Hardware, Tech Report, any of these guys saw RPMs at those levels beforehand. So I believe that what AMD has done is they have, as more samples came out, as more statistics were shown to them, they decided they needed to raise the fan speed in order to maintain performance levels that they were expecting based on their first kind of prototypes, I guess. Which is not necessarily bad, but it kind of shifts how our reviews should look, right? So now the 290X is going to run a little bit faster, and it's going to be a little bit louder, and it's going to draw a little bit more power. So how does that change our opinion on the launch of the Hawaii GPU? And the same thing with the R9 290, right? So now it's going to run faster, it's going to run hotter, and it's going to run louder than it did before. So now is it loud enough that I would change my recommendation of the card as it was presented? And so my takeaway from this whole thing was that I felt like AMD wasn't prepared for the release. Like they didn't know. They should have known what the variance was going to be on these PWM states, right? I mean, that makes sense. And they should have known that they would needed to normalize based on RPM. And thus, we would have avoided this problem, right? It might have changed things, but at least at the beginning, you know your status. And it's not like, it kind of feels a little bit like a fly-by-wire graphics card release. It's still a good product. It still runs fast. But all these slight changes and tweaks, right? The fact that the R9 290 was going to originally be released with a 40% fan speed, and they boosted it to 47, and now they're boosting it a little bit more. It seems kind of they're not cheating on anything. It just seems like you guys should really have had this prepared beforehand. So it seems to be at a stable place now over the last half a week. I haven't really seen anybody else kind of complain about new things, other than I feel like now we kind of need to go back to the R9 290X and the R9 290 and evaluate them again at new performance levels, at new power levels, and at new noise levels. Any thoughts?
The variance from chip to chip with such a hugely complex die. I mean, it's 6.2, 6.4 billion transistors in a 430 millimeter square package. Mm-hmm. You're going to get some serious variance in how well that entire chip is able to utilize power, transistor switching speeds, tolerances. I mean, it's just you're adding more complexity to a part that is already complex, and it's in a small relative die space. I mean, we kind of look at what NVIDIA did. They have a 7 billion transistor part at 530 millimeters squared. And so they have... NVIDIA is probably less heat prone to performance than what AMD is, because as these transistors heat up, they will pull more power, thereby creating more heat. And I think that they just maybe, in this case, packed them in too tight. And the variances we are seeing from chips that are from the outside of the wafer, which may have some lithography errors, as compared to those that are in kind of the sweet spots on the wafer that don't have as many errors, or the tolerances are a little tighter, and so they don't eat as much power, they don't produce as much heat. But these other ones that are outside the center, you're going to see more and more of that. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see what comes out of this, because they're walking a thin line with how dense this product is and how much surface area they have to kind of dissipate heat, and how much tolerance they have, in a micron scale or nanometer scale, that they have between all of the gates, vias, whatever, that could be contributing to this variance.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the GPU variance itself. Like, I realize there's going to be some, especially with the advent of like boost and variable clocks. There's going to be some variance. The issue was the variance in the fan speeds, which kind of made those differences even more pronounced. It's something they should have found. It's something they should have known. It's something that should not have happened, right? Like, you should see these issues crop up before you pass out a bunch of cards to the press and start selling them to the consumer. And they obviously didn't. So, I mean, this is a really interesting topic. I would encourage you guys to go to pcper.com, which is an amazing website, and read these stories that we're talking about in reference to the different driver changes and kind of what our status was at the end of that. But, download that driver. I think it's a little odd that somebody... So, for example, if you had the retail R9 290 that I bought, and you ran the 13.11 V8 driver, and then you just happened to update to the 13.11 V9.2 and didn't really know, what was happening in the background, I think you would notice a 300 RPM change while you're gaming, right? And so you'd be like, why does my video card sound louder? I don't really understand why that's the case. So it just creates an odd situation for AMD. But keep checking on that. Let's take a quick second here. We're going to thank a podcast sponsor before we move on to a crap ton of stories that we need to compress into like 40 minutes. So take it away, me.
This episode of the PC Perspective Podcast is brought to you by Carbonite Online Backup. Your life is on your computer at home, and your livelihood is on the computers at your small business. To really be protected, you need online, off-site, in the cloud backup from Carbonite. With Carbonite, your files are automatically and continually backed up, so you never have to think about it. Once you have Carbonite, the computer disaster isn't really a disaster because Carbonite makes it easy to restore your backed up files. Over 1 million customers trust Carbonite to protect their home and small business computer files with plans starting at $59.99 a year. Your better backup plan for home and for your small business is Carbonite. Start your free trial today at Carbonite.com with the offer code PC and get 2 bonus months with purchase. That's Carbonite.com, and the offer code for 2 bonus months is PC.
Man, that guy sounds like a handsome gentleman. I'd like to meet that guy. So like I said, we've got a lot of stuff we're going to try to get through, so we may walk through it faster. For example, I'm going to be a butthead and just casually reference Steve Chardine's review that he posted of the MSI GE40 gaming notebook with the subplot of, is it the best of both worlds? It's actually, I had that in our office for a little while too. It's actually a really nice machine. So it's a Haswell-based quad-core part, the Core i7-4702 MQ, but it also has the GTX 760M discrete graphics with 2 gigs of frame buffer, 8 gigs of memory. It's got an SSD and a hard drive in it. It's a 14-inch display, so it's got a 1600 by 900 resolution panel, matte finish, which is a nice touch. And this, in my book, is kind of like as good as I've seen so far in terms of balancing a thin and light notebook. It's not ultrabook thin or anything like that, but you get some gaming performance out of it when you need it, right? So it was able to run Just Cause 2 and StarCraft 2 and Diablo 3 and Metro 2033, Bioshock Infinite. For example, Bioshock Infinite ran on this machine at about 52 frames per second on 1080p ultra detail, right? So that's pretty impressive for a gaming machine. The battery life was decent, not amazing, but decent. I think it only had a 6-cell battery on it. And let's see, what's he say here? So web surfing, just a little bit below 5 hours. So not fantastic. But, oh wait, no, here we go. Yeah. This is amongst the better, actually, in terms of battery life. So we get questions a lot about notebooks, and I'm not the expert on the notebooks right now. We're handing that off to Steve. So check out that review. Just went up this week, just a couple days ago, actually, of the MSI GE40. And, game reviews, gaming notebooks, something's going on. Let's talk about
the warranty.
Yeah. What's that? Oh, yeah.
It's got one of those stupid stickers on the bottom. If you remove the sticker, which gains you access to, the RAM, the CPU, the SSD, essentially everything, you haven't avoided your warranty.
Just tell them I said you could. It's fine.
One day, I'll have a laptop.
I wonder if that automobile warranty kind of court case thing applies to a laptop with a sticker like that.
I don't know. It's an interesting idea where where they can't deny a warranty because you worked on it yourself. Thing? Yeah, like they can't deny a warranty on the entire thing because you worked on a section that would not impact. Like if you changed out the hard drive and then the video card messes up.
Yeah, but you might have done it with your tongue. I mean, we've all seen how people upgrade things.
I changed the air filter, and suddenly the next day, my timing chain fell off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. We got a lot of stuff to get to. AMD spills Kaveri beans. Josh, quickly walk me through...
Do I really have to talk about this?
Well, we'll do it quickly.
Kaveri. It's not clocked as high as we expected it to be. It's still going to be about 856 gigaflops. Yes, gigaflops. Kaveri, 856 exactly. We found out a few more things. It's going to be a 512 stream unit graphics, so that is very comparable to the HD 7750 or the recently released R7 250, I think. Anyway.
All right.
So it's got plenty of graphics muscle. Steamroller looks to be a pretty beefy architecture that is comparable to the current i5 parts from Intel, which is a big plus for AMD because they have certainly been lacking in terms of IPC. Everything internally to Steamroller has essentially been doubled. It's got 2 by 128-bit FMAX, which can combine to support AVX 256. You've got double the decode in the front end. So the problem with the previous iterations of this is that any clock, you could only handle 2 threads total for these parts. So you had 2 modules that can handle 2 threads, but with the new front ends that they have with Steamroller, every clock you can have 4 threads. So potentially we are doubling the multi-threaded performance, but also internally they have done a lot of work to improve IPC. So we're going to see some significant jumps in both single-threaded and multi-threaded performance with these parts. They haven't given us the speeds yet of these, but it kind of looks like it's about 3.7 gigahertz.
No, they did. So did you see that story where they had to put it in the footnotes?
Yeah, they didn't officially announce it.
It was this 3.7 gigahertz on the clock speed.
3.7 and 720 for the graphics.
Yeah.
So overall, we're going to see a pretty big speed increase and capability increase from what we have now, which is Richland, which is based on Trinity, and again, some nice optimizations there. But that's the extent of it. So, yeah. It's going to be a better part. It's going to keep AMD in the ring, and the addition of all the HUMA and HQ functionality that we are starting to see, and it is Mantle compliant, and it has the true audio capabilities.
It does.
It could be a decent little chip for the price.
We also found out, side note, that the PS4 has true audio in it. And I assume that would mean the Xbox One would too, but I don't know that.
I'm pretty sure Xbox One does have true audio. I mean, the DSP that AMD developed for that is very, very small. It's going to have a small impact on transistor count and die space. Mm-hmm. Why not put it in?
So Kaveri looks interesting. It's a little bit slower than maybe people had expected. Well, a little bit slower than what AMD had said it was going to be, as of like 18 months ago. So we'll keep an eye on that. Also, I did post a video of so at the keynote they demoed Battlefield 4 against an Intel platform with a discrete GeForce GT 630 graphics card, and I actually got them to turn the system back on the next day, running the Kaveri prototype system. So I actually had video of it running Battlefield 4, 1080p, medium settings. And it was able to hit 29 to 33 frames per second on it, which was pretty cool. And then they demoed a like JPEG decompression acceleration through HSA that was neat. So check that out. Josh wrote up a really good story on the new details of Kaveri, and follow all that. Also,
one last thing to add is that even though it is not a huge increase in overall gigaflops, the GCN architecture is much more efficient than VLIW4, which was in Trinity and Richland. And so graphics performance, even though it's only like, supposedly 10% faster in overall gigaflops, in real world performance, it looks like it's going to be significantly faster. So, moving along, what's your name, Ryan?
It's Ryan. Yeah, we're going to talk about more APUs. AMD also announced today Beema and Mullins, which are code names for upcoming like low power consumption APUs.
That is correct. AMD because they do not have the luxury of going to 22 nanometer FinFET or 20 nanometer FinFET that Intel is at with their 3D Tri-Gates. They had to do a lot of redesign in their basic core. So Jaguar has become Puma. It is an evolutionary change of the architecture. Nothing new has been added overall in terms of cache sizes, decode units, execution units, any of those things. But what AMD has done is gone through it with a fine-tooth comb and has increased the efficiency of the design by a factor of 2. So we're seeing 15-watt Beema processors competing and exceeding the performance of 25-watt Jaguar-based or Kaveri in this case. And this happens as well with Mullins, which is their very low-end, low-power that competes against Temash or Temash. I can never remember. Temash. So we have a combination of lower power, slightly higher clock speeds, and they haven't given us exactly what the clock speeds are, but we do know that in each case it is more efficient than the previous generation. And that's good because they cannot rely on a lower, smaller process node to give them the advantages that what Intel has right now, and in terms of architecture, what ARM has at 28 nanometers. So this is a good jump ahead for AMD. They're making the best of a crappy situation for themselves. And certainly we'll start seeing these. I think they're going to show them off initially at CES 2014. And they will be available throughout the first half of 2014. And they look to be decent parts. They're going to be fanless, tablet-based quad cores with decent performance in both CPU and graphics. So it's another big release for AMD, and they're making the most of what they have because they certainly don't have the process technology behind them to compete directly with Intel.
In more AMD news again, how about I just posted an AMD Mantle deep dive video, which was a session from the APU 13 event that I'm at. They talked about actually how the execution model of Mantle is different than other APIs. So it's about 50 minutes long or so. If you're interested in what Mantle is, how it works, how it compares to DirectX and OpenGL, I think this is the first time they've ever given out this much detail. So I recorded that session this morning and added in the slides and made it all fancy for you guys so you can go watch that and learn about it. It was surprisingly interesting, not surprisingly, but it was pretty interesting, right? And they even talk about, hey, what does this do for multi-GPU? It actually adds some interesting things in for multi-GPU where you don't have, AFR may not be something that we have to worry about in the future. It could be, remember when Lucid was promising like task-based, virtualized multi-GPU acceleration? Like this is kind of going to enable the same thing, only directly through it. So there was a lot of information on Mantle this week. Hopefully you were following me on Twitter or whatever and saw some of the posts with it. We got a demo of that today, but you can see the deep dive video that I did post up as well. And then right below that is actually, if you want to watch the replay of the live blog for when Johan Anderson was doing a keynote this afternoon, that is up there as well. So, hey, and I got to upload a 1.94 gigabyte file over hotel Wi-Fi. So, success, I guess. We got two more articles we're going to talk about. Two more articles to talk about. One is the EVGA NVIDIA Tegra Note 7 review. So this is, I totally failed here because I have it in my backpack, but it's all the way over there. But the Tegra Note 7 is a $199 7-inch Tegra 4 based tablet. Where they kind of announced the program a couple of months ago, but now they're actually going up for pre-order. I think they go on sale this coming week, like next Tuesday, I think it is. And so it's a stock Android running 4.2.2 right now, 7-inch tablet that has some pretty nice features, right? So it has a stylus included with it. It's not an active stylus, but NVIDIA has what they call direct stylus technology that actually makes it fairly comparable to an active stylus and much better than other passive styluses that you may have used like on the Nexus 7. It has a Tegra 4 processor in there, so its graphics performance is really good. Its CPU performance is really good. So gaming and other applications run really well. I am a big fan of the front-facing speakers. For multimedia consumption devices, it just makes sense to have speakers on the front as opposed to on the back where the sound is pointing away from you when you're looking at the screen. It just didn't make any sense. Plus, they're stereo speakers, kind of like you have on the HTC One smartphone. So you actually get pretty good stereo audio out of a small $199 tablet device. So it's actually pretty cool there. They gave us the accessory, so it's got like a smart cover-like device that will lock and unlock it, and used as a stand with a few different angles that you can take with it. The stylus works pretty well. There are definitely some differences between it and what you get with like the Galaxy Note 8. Like for instance, drawing dots, like points on it, is pretty hard with the NVIDIA stylus, but it's obviously much easier with an active stylus because it's actually communicating. Like the stylus has logic in it, and it's communicating in a different way as opposed to just simulating capacitive touch. The camera quality is good. The camera app will support always-on HDR, which is a feature they bragged about at CES last year with Tegra 4, but it's not enabled in this one, and it'll be pushed out. I think they said by the end of November, if not by the end of December. So I mean, it's a pretty decent device. Like it has some shortcomings. It's a 1280 by 800 screen instead of a 1920 by 1200 screen that you get on the Google Nexus 7. It is $30 less expensive than that, so that's good. It also doesn't have 5 gigahertz radio. It's only 2.4 gigahertz radio. It's a little bit heavier than the Nexus 7. It's a little bit thicker than the Nexus 7, but it's not that much different. It feels different in your hand, but when you actually do the weight, it's not a huge gap there between the Nexus 7. So it doesn't come away as the absolute winner against the Nexus 7. And if I had to pick one to say recommend a blanket to everybody, I would probably still go with the Nexus 7. But I think for a first attempt, the Tegra Note 7 is a pretty competent device that I think a lot of people are going to like. The battery life isn't as good as the Nexus 7. I think I got like just under 8 hours in our Wi-Fi test, while we got like 11 hours on the Nexus 7. So there's a difference there. But the Tegra 4 is a higher performance part. If that's something you care about, if you do Tegra gaming, it was kind of cool. One thing that I wish they would have done is enable some more of the Shield features on this. Like the whole idea of using the Shield as a console, you hook HDMI up to it, you can do PC game streaming. You can play Android and you can hook it up to the TV and play Android games with a Bluetooth controller, but you can't stream PC games with the Tegra Note 7, which I think is a little bit of something they should have done. They claim that without the 5 gigahertz radio they couldn't do it, but I think it's a pretty interesting device. I would encourage you, if you think it's something you might like, to go read this review. The whole last page talks about my experiences. Well, what is it like using it for media consumption? What is it like for using it as a work device, a gaming device, a stylus-based device for writing and that. So check that out. I think it's an interesting device. It's not a great device, but I think it's a really good device for $200.
How do you think it stacks up to the Shield? Like as far as a gaming device goes? Because I mean, I saw you pairing it with a joystick, so that immediately
the Shield controller is a great controller. Yeah, but this Bluetooth controller that they sent along with it is not a great controller. It's fine. It's got a bigger screen than the Shield, right? So
yeah.
It's a 5-inch screen on the Shield versus a 7-inch screen on this device. And so, like, if you're going to sit there and play an Android game with the controller, I thought it was pretty good. I had, the Note 7 sit on the counter with the cover acting as a stand. I was playing on it, and it's a usable device for that. I just don't know how many people are going to be dedicated enough to Android gaming to carry a controller with them at the same time.
But audio.
The speakers are great. I agree. The front-facing speakers are much, much better than any other tablet I've used, period. They claim that it has like a bass port on it and stuff, which maybe it does, but it's not going to rock your house with something of that size. But it's a good device. Go read the review. Go check it out. We got a little video up there too to show off some of the stuff, capabilities and whatnot. It was an interesting experience to test it, right? Because the Nexus 7 is so well regarded in that specific space that it's an uphill battle for it. Hey, you know what this podcast needs a little more of, guys?
Alan.
Storage.
It needs a little bit more Alan in it, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
So let's talk about the Western Digital MyCloud EX4 personal cloud goes big.
Yeah, so Western Digital launched a device called the MyCloud a little while back, and it's a single drive, looks like a MyBook, except it just has a firmware on it, and it's different type of connectivity. It connects via gigabit Ethernet to your router, and sort of acts more like a mini NAS than just an external USB hard drive, for example. And then they followed it up rather quickly with this guy, which is the MyCloud EX4. So this is sort of a mix between the MyCloud, the single drive unit, and the Western Digital Sentinel, which is a enterprise small office kind of 4-bay NAS device. So if you take sort of some features from both of those, you mix them together, you get this. So what you have is a 4-bay NAS with a ARM CPU in it. It's a single core ARM, but it runs at 2 gigahertz, half a gig of RAM, and so it's decently powerful. And you take some other enterprise features, so like instead of just putting a single gigabit Ethernet port on it, you put 2, which allows actually with like active redundancy or even load balancing between both, that sort of thing. You're not going to get insanely fast speeds with it, but at least it's there, right? If you have a router that can support hooking up, do channel bonding, for example, that sort of thing, it's really cool because you can actually have one of your cables could go bad and this thing would still keep on chugging, right? It'd still be on your network. Along those lines, also with sort of enterprisey features, is there's 2 power supply input ports in the back. Now, it only comes with 1 brick, but if you chose to, you could power this from like an ups in your wall or something, 2 independent power supplies separately. So if the power supply fails, which is, I believe, one of the most common things to go, is that power supply brick just dying. If something's going to die, then you still have a backup, right? It would stay powered on. So you might ask, why would it be so important to have all this stuff? Why so much redundancy, really? And I think they want that way with this because once you get this thing on your network, you can hook a lot of stuff up to it. So it has your internal drives, first of all, which can go up to 4 terabytes each. And the pricing is actually pretty decent, right? If you look, the unit itself is $380 MSRP, and then the way they tiered their pricing is it comes with Western Digital Reds already installed and already pre-configured, up and running in a RAID 5. You can change it if you want, but there you have it, and it's just ready to go out of the box. And the pricing is very on par with as if you paid $380 for the box and then tried to spec out your own order 4 Western Digital Reds from elsewhere. It's basically runs about the same price. So it just sort of makes sense to just get it with the capacity you want. It comes, it's ready to go. So you have that internal storage, and then you have 2 USB 3 ports out the back. So you can, say you have a couple of external USB-based hard drives you want to add to this. You tack those on, and they just appear as additional shares underneath this device. And then the firmware enables a whole bunch of other kind of functionality where you can have this thing just basically be a hub for almost anything on your network. It has like an iTunes media server if you want to share iTunes style files that way. It has there's just a whole bunch. There's for other media streaming stuff. There's what's the name of that Logitech thing? I forgot the name of that. Basically, there's like Logitech speakers that can stream off of a media server, that sort of deal. This can be one of those. There's an entire app framework for it, and I think at at present time, there are 10 different apps that it supports that you can install on it. And there's different things like an FTP, like you can do automated FTP downloads from a certain place, automated HTTP downloads from a certain place. You can have it check to see if the file updated and if it did pull down the update. News group, you can send it an NZB file and it'll reach out to the news group and pull it down in the background. You can give it a torrent file. It'll download that in the background. All sorts of stuff, right? And it can even map. Normally, you'd see a NAS, and you could potentially connect to it over iSCSI if you choose to, which acts sort of like a networked file system sort of thing. It just goes over the network, but it acts like a locally connected drive. This device can map under it other iSCSI targets from your network. So you could potentially have everything piped through this, and then now that it's all piped through it, you can access all of it through all of the MyCloud stuff. So you can have, you can launch an app on your desktop, and it'll browse either locally to it, or if you're on the go, it'll reach back through the MyCloud login, figure out, okay, where is the EX4? It basically locates it within your home network and sort of does a reverse lookup for you and accesses it as if it was local, right? And then you can drag and drop stuff to and from that interface, say if you needed to get access to whatever that file may be. So you could access basically anything on your home network through that technology, and with this particular device, you can just map a whole bunch of stuff out from under it. So pretty cool, and as far as the internal RAID goes, you can do all sorts of different, RAID 0, 1, 5, 10. You could just have them just a bunch of drive style, just drives just hanging there if you want. It comes RAID 5. I think that's the preferred option if you're going to have 4 drives. And when you get down to the only kind of hiccup we saw with the thing was when we got to the speed testing, and this is actually not representative of what even other reviewers were publishing on this. The Samba speeds we saw were decent. They were comparable to what other people were seeing. So we saw it was like 60 in reads, 40 in writes. So with the regular Samba type connectivity from transfers to and from Windows, that's pretty decent. However, this device can map an iSCSI target, so you can allocate space out of the array for a separate drive that maps as its own iSCSI target. And this is while the device is still running and still sharing via Samba, still doing everything else in the background. Now, for an iSCSI target, usually transfer rates are like in the 90 meg per second range. For some reason, on this one, it was going 40, 50, somewhere around there. And we're still kind of troubleshooting and communicating with Western Digital in the background here because when we were doing the writes, we caught it, the CPU pegging completely. So, and again, that was not representative of what other people were seeing. So, might just be some kind of corner case with the firmware, or
gotcha.
Maybe it just didn't like the fact that I installed all 10 available apps right out of the box when before doing anything else to it. I later removed those apps, but you never know. Maybe one of those was coded a little funky and just did something
Alan,
weird to
happily, excess is never enough.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I needed to look at all of the apps to at least see if they worked. So, hey. But
understand.
Barring that issue, which I suspect, we'll figure out what the deal was there. It's a pretty nifty little box. And the thing that really impresses me about it is the price, really, because it's right there on par with those Synology boxes. Right? The Synology Disk Station, like 412 or 414 or I forget which numbers they're up to now. But this is sort of like that kind of a device, but there just seems to be much more functionality in the firmware, which is weird for me to say because the Synology box has its own like Windows-looking GUI that pops up in the browser with all sorts of icons you can click on and everything, and I still feel like this might have more features in it.
Nice.
When you break everything down. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Again, check out that review is up on, guess what website, guys? Guess what website? PC Perspective. It's a
JoshTech.com.
JoshTech.
JoshTech.com with 2 Ks. Don't go there. So
it's your fault.
we got a couple of news stories. Let's get to these pretty quick. Let's get to the news stories pretty quick. Jeremy, why don't you take the first one?
Oh, but I was listening to Josh sing about his experiences in the Outback.
You know what? It was placed in Wyoming.
I bet it was placed in Wyoming.
And in fact, the person, Annie Prohl, who wrote the book...
You're really not paying attention to my time crunch.
Okay. So much like Josh's career in movies, SATA Express is losing a major backer. Intel is not going to support it for their new upcoming 9 series motherboards, the X99s for Haswell E. And they were sort of one of the proponents of this new interface that, in theory, was going to be a lot faster than the SATA 6 gigabits. Honestly, I've never seen a device that uses this. I don't know if Al's actually had a chance to play with it or not, but 2 gigabits or 2,000 would have been nice, bigger than 600.
You mean 2 gigabytes per second?
Yeah.
Yeah. It uses 2 of those ports, though. Realize it's basically a connector that you can plug in. It acts like a dual SATA port connector, so you can plug in devices that way. It's just keyed a certain way. Like imagine something that looks like an old IDE style box of a connector, except it just has the SATA connectors inside of it. You can plug 2 of those in, or the alternative is to plug in a larger connector that encompasses both of those SATA style connector pins as well as some additional pins off to the side of it, and that ends up being a PCIe 2 gigabit per second link to whatever the storage device may be. So it's a cool idea, but it has to be implemented properly, and it has to be you have to have lanes that can speak SATA and PCIe, right? And it's it's kind of a complicated thing to pull off. So they what is it? Their wording they use? They're just not certifying it.
Yeah, it's not going to be certified for their actual boards.
Yeah. So
on the other hand, hey, there's an extra 2 PCIe lanes opened up.
Well, that's again, or alternatively, nothing's to stop a motherboard manufacturer from this will be the first time we saw a motherboard manufacturer do something that was not supported by Intel, right? So the lanes are there, the conductors are there, the chipset was originally designed to do it. It might just be a matter of, hey, turn it on, see if it works. They would just have to put the connector on the board. And somebody would have to actually make products to plug into it.
I like the third comment on the story that says, must be nice to be in a position where you can keep releasing the same products year after year and still rake in billions of profits each and every quarter. And then he says something I won't say on the stream, but interesting.
Yeah.
So the interface that we never got to hate.
Yeah. All right, you want to tell us about the new GPU bundles? We knew it was happening. AMD is doing Never Settle again or something?
Well, they're sort of changing Never Settled a little bit in that for the upcoming holiday season, essentially if you pick up anything apart from an R7 260X, you get Battlefield 4. This is not a bad thing. This kind of takes away from the BF4 bundle that was sort of announced and suggested would be sort of a unique offer, but at the same point, it's a game that a lot of people are going to want, and it's new enough that a lot of people aren't going to have it. So this really doesn't hurt. Yeah. Honestly, in a way, I'm a little more interested in the 260X, because then you get a choice of 2 of the 6 Never Settle Forever Silver tiers, which now includes Thief, which isn't out yet, so you'd actually be getting a hold of a game which you couldn't buy any other way at this point, well, unless you pre-ordered it. So that makes it sort of a little bit interesting for those that are looking for the lower end. But at the same point, I love that they're keeping the Never Settle going. I love that they keep changing it. Because, if you look at the silver, one of the tiered rewards is Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon, which has been kicking around for a while, and anyone that was going to pick it up probably did it on bargain. Battlefield 4, on the other hand, hey, if this may be the only way I end up with Battlefield 4, because, well, got to admit, I'm vastly unimpressed, EA.
I think how much is a 260X? Like $170?
Not even $200.
What is it? I don't remember now. I'm totally blanking on
I think
how
it's
much
179 or 169.
Say again?
It's 179 or 169.
Okay. But the fact that you can get Thief, which is going to be a $50 game, and something else, it's probably
oh, good
20,
lord, no, like more like 140.
Good deal. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pegging in at 140 for just about all of the models. So seriously, you're picking up as much in games almost as you are in hardware.
Yeah.
Not bad.
Yeah, not bad. I think that's going to wrap up. I'm going to skip our hardware software picks of the week this week, guys. So we can Yeah, I think so. And we'll just use these same picks next week.
Okay.
That's too bad because I have. Well, I would play it. Maybe I'll save it for next week then.
Be less sad. Like, just you'll be okay. You'll be fine. You're right. If you want to find us, subscribe to us. It's at you can find all the information at pcper.com/podcast. You can get the RSS links. You can get the direct downloads of the MP3s. You can find the YouTube links, or you can just subscribe to the YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/pcper, and that's another way to get access to it there. I guess that's it. Follow
Halloween contest when you get home, right?
Yes. I said that at the beginning of the show. If somebody showed up late, I did not forget about the Halloween contest. I just haven't had a chance to look at everything, all the submissions yet because of traveling. So when I get home Thursday or Friday, we will do that. We will look at it. We will announce the winner. We will post about it, and then we'll talk about it on next week's show. We did not forget about it. Somebody will get all of that Corsair hardware with a gigabyte hard motherboard as well. So
just in time for October 2014.
Yeah, you've got a whole year now to submit your costume, and no, I'm just kidding. Next week we'll announce it. So thanks everybody for hanging out. Sorry for the little bit of a rushed format. I know it was a busy week, and I'm getting ready I'm going to shut this laptop. I'm going to go upstairs and get my suitcase, and I'm going to go to the San Jose airport to take a red-eye flight home. So that's what I get to look forward to. But join us next week when we record the show Wednesday at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. And this week we have a special stream, hopefully, if everything goes as planned, Thursday night or Friday morning, depending on how you look at it, after the PlayStation 4 is released. Ken and I are going to go to Best Buy. We're going to pick up the PS4 that I bought, and then we're going to promptly bring it back to the office and try to open it and show you everything inside and not break it, and then put it back together and see if it still works. It's just something we sometimes do. We'll see.
I hope it creates such wonderful commentary as we're still getting at that Xbox 360 Slim thread you guys did.
You should read the comment on the Wii U teardown. It's just,
true.
They're not great. Like people that watch it in replay don't realize that it was a live thing and whatever. So join us tomorrow if you're interested in that. It'll be on our Twitch channel. It'll be on pcper.com/live. That's Thursday at it'll probably start around 12:30, 1 a.m. Eastern. So plan accordingly. Get your coffee ready. So thanks, guys, for joining us. We'll see you next week. I'm Ryan Shrout.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom.
I'm Josh Walrath.
And I'm Alan Malventano.
JoshTech.com.
JoshTech.com.
All right.